Welcome, wanderers of words and dreamers of quiet worlds. You found your way to a place of stories, where each tale breathes with feeling, memory, and a touch of wonder. Settle in, take a deep breath, and let's begin. The orchard at the edge of the wind. At the northern edge of the valley, where the hills rose like sleeping giants and the grass never stopped moving in the wind, there stood an orchard, old enough that no one remembered who had planted it. The trees were crooked and gnarled, their trunks silvered by age, their branches interwoven like the fingers of ancient hands. In summer, their fruit ripened golden green, but now, in the fading light of early autumn, they bore nothing but whispering leaves and the faint scent of something long remembered. Lena arrived at dusk. Her boots were muddy from the long road, and her satchel hung heavy on her shoulder. She paused at the gate, one hand resting on the latch, and let the wind move through her hair. It carried with it the scent of apples. Not the sharp, fresh kind, but something softer, older, like cider left to rest in wooden barrels. The cottage stood just beyond the trees, small and square, with smoke rising faintly from its chimney. A cat was sitting on the windowsill, tail twitching. Lena hesitated, then pushed the gate open. The hinges creaked like something waking from a dream. Inside, the orchard felt alive, not in a magical, glittering way, but in the quiet, grounded sense that every rustle and shift of the air had intent. The leaves turned to follow her. The branches swayed, even when there was no wind. She found the key where the letter had said it would be, tucked behind the third brick from the right under the porch. The letter had been brief. If you ever tire of the city, come to the orchard. It's still here. Everything waits in its own way. She had not known what to expect. It had been 10 years since she'd last seen the man who signed it. 10 years since she'd left this place in the back of a rattling truck, telling herself she would never come back. Inside, the cottage smelled of cedar and dust. The furniture was simple, a table, 2 chairs, a wood stove. On the mantel, she found an old photograph in a cracked frame. A boy and a girl standing among the apple trees, laughing, sunlight tangled in their hair. She touched the glass with her fingertips. "Hello, Moreau," she whispered. The cat jumped from the windowsill onto the table, startling her. It was an enormous creature, dark gray with pale eyes, and it stared at her with a look that was almost knowing. "Well," she said, managing a small smile, "you must be the keeper of the place now." The cat blinked once and then padded toward the door, meowing softly, as if telling her to follow. Outside, the last of the daylight lingered on the hills. The orchard rustled in the dim glow, and from somewhere deep among the trees came a faint sound, like the slow chime of bells or wind moving through hollow wood. Lena paused at the edge of the first row of trees. The air felt heavier here, full of the scent of sap and damp soil. She could almost hear the orchard breathing. The days passed in a kind of gentle blur. Morning light spilled through the cottage windows like spilled honey, and the orchard hummed softly at all hours. Lena mended things, the cracked window panes, the loose stair rail, the warped door. She found old tools in the shed, their handles smoothed by years of use, and every repair she made seemed to stir something unseen. The cat followed her everywhere. It had no collar, but she started calling it Echo, because it always seemed to arrive just after she spoke. When she worked in silence, she often caught the faint sound of someone else's steps nearby. Never close enough to see, just distant enough to make her wonder if the trees themselves shifted when she turned away. One evening, while pruning a branch that had grown across the path, she noticed something strange. Where she had cut, the sap shimmered faintly, not gold, not silver, but a kind of soft pale light, as though the tree had swallowed sunlight and was letting it go drop by drop. She stepped back, unsure whether to feel wonder or fear. The wind stirred the branches, and for a moment, she thought she heard a voice in it, faint, childlike. Still here. The words were barely a whisper. She froze, breath shallow, eyes scanning the rows of trees. The orchard was empty. Only the long grass moved. When she returned inside, she found something new on the mantel. A small wooden carving. An apple, perfectly shaped, the grain of the wood polished smooth. She was certain it hadn't been there before. "Someone's playing tricks," she muttered, but her voice trembled. Echo jumped onto the table and began to purr, the sound deep and resonant. That night, Lena dreamed. She was standing among the trees again, but the orchard glowed softly, as if moonlight had pooled in every leaf. She saw a figure ahead of her, small and slender, walking barefoot through the grass. "Moreau," she called. The figure turned, but before she could see his face, the wind rose, not violent, but strong enough to lift her hair, strong enough to carry 1,000 whispers all at once. "Stay," the orchard seemed to say. "Stay." And remember, when she woke, the cat was sitting on her chest, staring into her eyes, as if to make sure she was still there. And outside, the wind had changed direction. It took nearly a week for Lena to gather her courage and venture deeper into the orchard. She packed a basket, bread, water, her old notebook, and followed the narrow trail that led between the oldest trees. The deeper she went, the quieter the world became. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the wind faded until it was only her heartbeat she could hear. In the center of the orchard stood a tree unlike the others. Enormous, its bark smooth and pale, its branches wide as wings. Beneath it, the earth dipped slightly, forming a shallow bowl. There, half buried among the roots, was a lantern. It was made of iron, tarnished by weather, but still whole. A faint shimmer pulsed within its glass. A slow, steady glow, as though the light inside it breathed. Lena knelt beside it. Her fingers trembled as she brushed away the dirt. The metal was warm, and the glow brightened at her touch. She whispered his name again. "Moreau." The lantern flickered. Something stirred in the soil beneath it. Not movement exactly, but memory. She saw flashes in her mind. The two of them as children, running between these trees, carving their initials into the bark, promising never to leave. Then the sound of laughter, not hers, not now, but younger, freer. And another voice, his voice. "When I'm gone, the wind will tell you everything." Tears stung her eyes. She had left before the illness took him, before the orchard went silent. She had never said goodbye. Now, the wind rose again, sweeping through the branches like a sigh. The leaves shimmered in response, and the light from the lantern spread outward, flowing through the roots like water. All around her, the orchard began to glow, not brightly, but softly, like a memory returning. Lena stood there for a long time, her face wet with tears as the lantern's pulse slowed, then steadied, until it matched the rhythm of her own heart. When she finally turned back toward the cottage, she felt lighter, not as though the past had vanished, but as though it had found its place. The orchard hummed as she walked, a low, contented sound. The wind carried whispers through the leaves, gentle, familiar, forgiving. And when she reached the gate, Echo was waiting. The cat brushed against her leg, purring, and when she looked back one last time, she could have sworn she saw him, Moreau, standing among the trees, smiling faintly, as though to say, "You remembered." She nodded once. "I did." The wind sighed in reply, and the orchard settled into the calm rhythm of evening, leaves whispering a final word that only she could hear, not of loss, but of belonging. In the days that followed, Lena felt the orchard changing, or perhaps it was she who changed in the orchard's rhythm. The air carried a softness she hadn't noticed before. The light through the trees shifted slower, richer, as though time itself had learned to breathe. Each morning she woke to the steady creak of branches and the soft patter of falling leaves, and each night she lit the old lantern. She kept it on the windowsill, where the glow reached the orchard edge, its faint shimmer reflected in Echo's unblinking eyes. The lantern's light was never constant. Some evenings it was faint, barely there, and others it brightened enough to cast golden shapes along the walls. Ripples, waves, fleeting faces half remembered. She never tried to explain it anymore. Instead, she began to speak aloud while she worked. At first, it was only to fill the silence. Small things, casual, "Should I prune that one?" Or, "You'd never believe how crooked this fence is." But slowly her words began to find answers in the world around her. A leaf drifting down at the exact moment she asked a question, a low hum in the branches when she mentioned a name. One evening she found herself sitting on the porch, cup of tea cooling in her hands, and spoke softly into the wind. "I didn't mean to leave you," she said. The orchard rustled faintly, not judgmental, not forgiving, just listening. "You stayed," she continued, half to the cat sitting by her feet. "You, and the trees, and everything. You kept growing." A breeze touched her cheek, light as breath. The lantern on the sill flickered twice, slow and rhythmic like a heartbeat. Echo tilted his head, watching. It was strange how quickly she had fallen into the pattern of life here. Mornings for mending fences and clearing fallen fruit. Afternoons for sitting by the creek that cut through the lower orchard, sketching the shapes of branches reflected in the water. Sometimes she even caught herself humming, small melodies without words, the kind she used to sing as a child when Moreau dared her to climb the tallest tree. In town, people had begun to speak of her again. The old caretaker's niece, they said, the one who came back after all those years. When she went for supplies, the grocer would nod politely, and the woman at the post office would smile, always curious but never asking too much. It suited her that way. Still, there were moments when she felt something missing. Not quite loneliness, not sadness either, more like a faint echo of a note she could never reach. One night, unable to sleep, she took the lantern and walked into the orchard. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and the wind pressed low against the grass. Her boots brushed through fallen leaves, and the air smelled of rain. She didn't have a destination in mind, but her steps led her back to the great tree at the orchard's center, the one that had guarded the lantern all those years. When she reached it, the wind fell still. The roots glimmered faintly, as if lit from beneath, and the lantern's glow brightened, casting soft light across the bark. For a moment, she thought she saw something move in the shimmer, the faint outline of a boy's face, no older than he had been the summer before she left. "Moreau," she said quietly. There was no voice this time, no whisper of words in the wind, but the air around her thickened, full of presence, of recognition. "I didn't think it would still be here," she continued. "Any of it." A single leaf drifted down, landing on her shoulder. She took it in her hand. Its veins glowed faintly gold in the lantern light before fading back to green. The orchard sighed. When she turned to go, she noticed something she hadn't before, a narrow path, faintly worn into the grass, leading beyond the farthest row of trees toward a ridge she'd never climbed. For reasons she couldn't name, she followed. The air grew cooler as she went, the scent of the trees replaced by the wild tang of wet stone and moss. Soon she reached the crest, and there, below her, lay the valley in its entirety, silver under moonlight, the orchard a dark patchwork of shapes at its center. She hadn't realized how far the orchard reached. It seemed endless now, rolling out in uneven lines like waves on a still sea. Lena stood there until dawn, watching the light slowly return. When the first rays broke over the hills, she saw something glinting near her feet. She knelt, a small object half buried in the dirt. It was another carving, Not an apple this time, but a bird, wings outstretched, feathers etched in delicate, patient detail. On the underside, carved so faintly she almost missed it, was a single word: begin. Lena didn't find the letter until a week later. She was sweeping the cottage, her movements unhurried, when a broom caught on a loose board beneath the kitchen table. The plank lifted easily, and beneath it was a small space lined with paper and dust. Inside lay a folded envelope, yellowed with age. Her hand shook as she lifted it out. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, a looping, careful script she hadn't seen since she was 15. For when you come back. She sat at the table, the sunlight slanting through the window, and opened it. Inside were only a few lines. If you're reading this, it means you did what I couldn't. You left, but you found your way back. The orchard doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive in a way people do. It just waits. It remembers the shape of who we were, and when it sees us again, it breathes differently. There's a book under the window seat, the old ledger. I marked the trees that never took fruit, the ones that withered. You'll know what to do with them. You always did. When you mend the orchard, it mends you too. M. Her vision blurred as she read. The sunlight wavered. After a long moment, she rose and went to the window seat. Beneath the cushion, as promised, she found the ledger, its leather cover cracked and soft, its pages filled with numbers, sketches, and careful notes. At the bottom of the last page, in newer ink, were words added later in her own hand. For Lena, if she ever returns. She closed the book gently. The rest of that day passed in stillness. She worked among the trees until her arms ached, pruning the branches that leaned too heavy, tying the young shoots to stakes so they'd grow straight. The wind was steady. The cat followed her lazily from row to row, and the orchard seemed to hum with a quiet kind of gratitude. That night, when she lit the lantern again, the flame shone stronger than ever before. Its light reached the far corners of the room, and for the first time, she could see faint shapes reflected in the glass. The ghost of the boy she had known, the flicker of her younger self beside him, and the orchard beyond, endless and alive. She smiled. Not everything could be mended, but this was enough. The rain began before dawn. A steady, unhurried murmur against the roof that wove itself into Lena's dreams until she finally woke, unsure where the sound ended and memory began. For a long while she stayed beneath the quilt, eyes half open, watching the dull glow of morning creep through the window. Outside, the orchard blurred beneath a mist of silver. The world was hushed, softened. Each branch glistened with a skin of water. It was the kind of day that made the hearth's light feel like a living thing. She brewed tea. The kettle's whistle faint beneath the patter of rain, and sat at the table with her cup between her palms. Echo was curled on the windowsill, tail twitching, eyes following each drop that rolled down the glass. "Not much for pruning today," she said aloud, and the cat blinked slowly, as if agreeing. The orchard needed rain, she knew that, but it had a way of unsettling her too. Rain blurred edges. It made the familiar uncertain. The paths she knew by heart turned to suggestion and shadow. It brought the orchard closer, somehow, as if the trees leaned in to listen. She tried to read, to distract herself, but her gaze kept returning to the window. Finally, she rose, wrapped herself in her coat, and stepped outside. The moment she opened the door, the scent of the world hit her. Rich earth, wet bark, the faint sweetness of crushed fruit. The ground gave softly underfoot. Each step left a clear impression, filled almost instantly with water. The orchard was different in the rain. The branches bent under their own shimmer, and the air hummed faintly, like the lone note of a cello. As she walked, she caught glimpses of small things. A snail gliding along a root, a robin shaking droplets from its feathers, the the first snowdrops daring to show beneath a hedge. When she reached the center tree, the oldest, the one that had always seemed more alive than the rest, she paused. Rain traced the bark like veins of silver. The roots looked almost like fingers gripping the earth. The lantern she'd brought the night before still hung from a low branch, its wick long cold. She touched it gently, then left it there. It belonged more to the orchard now than to her. She continued walking, past the outer rows where the trees thinned and the grass gave way to reeds. The rain softened everything into watercolor, gray sky, green blur, her breath a wisp of mist. At the farthest edge, near the ridge she'd climbed weeks ago, she found something unexpected, a small structure, half hidden in ivy and moss. It was an old tool shed, or what remained of one. Its roof had caved in on one side, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. She pushed it open carefully. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and damp earth. Shelves lined the walls, still holding rusted shears, a cracked pot, a coil of twine hardened by time. In one corner, beneath a layer of fallen leaves, something glinted faintly. Lena crouched and brushed the debris aside. A tin box, small, dented, its latch still intact. She opened it, expecting nothing more than nails or seeds. But inside were letters, dozens of them, folded, tied with a string. The handwriting was the same looping script she'd found before, morose. Her heart caught. The first envelope she opened began without greeting. The orchard listens best when it rains. The sound of it is like language, though not one I can ever learn. You could, though. You always could. Another. There are days I think the trees remember you better than I do. They turn when I walk by, as if expecting another shadow beside mine, and another still near the end of the bundle. If you find this, it means I didn't know how to stop writing to you. Maybe I never wanted to. The letters spanned years. She could tell by the paper, by the faint shifts in ink color and tone. Some are only fragments, observations about the weather, the harvest, a bird's nest in the eaves. Others were confessions, quiet and aching. By the time she finished reading, the rain had eased. She sat there for a long time, the box in her lap, the world outside washed clean. When she finally rose, she carried the letters back to the cottage. She dried them carefully near the fire, spreading them out on the table like old leaves. That night, she didn't light the lantern. The orchard was bright enough with memory. The first true thaw came a week later. Snow retreated from the fields in slow, reluctant patches, and the air lost its sharpness. The creek that bordered the orchard swelled with melted frost, its song quick and bright. Lena could feel the shift in her bones, the same restlessness that came every year when the earth began to turn green again. She worked longer hours now, cleaning away the winter's litter, preparing the soil for the early blooms. The cat followed her like a shadow, sometimes darting ahead to chase phantom things in the grass. One morning, while clearing brush near the fence, she noticed something small sticking out of the earth. Not metal, not stone, but wood. She brushed the dirt away. It was a signpost, weathered, almost unreadable. Only a few carved letters remained. Orchard Path to town. She realized then that this must have been the old route Moreau used when he took fruit to the market, long before the main road was built. Curiosity took her, and she followed it. The path wound through thickets and bramble, then opened into a meadow she didn't remember. The grass here was shorter, dotted with pale blue flowers. A single willow leaned over the far edge of the clearing, its branches trailing the ground. Beneath it sat a small wooden bench, cracked but sturdy. On it lay a book. The cover was familiar, her uncle's handwriting, the same as the ledger. Inside were sketches of trees, notes, and pressed petals. But near the back, a new section began, written in Moreau's hand again. There's something about beginnings that feel like endings, and endings that feel like beginnings. I don't know what this orchard will be when you come back, but I hope it's still listening. The page beside it held a sketch of the two of them as children. She could tell from the way he drew her hair, uneven and short, and the tilt of his grin. For a long while she sat there, the book open on her knees, the willow's shadow shifting across the page. Spring was coming. The orchard would bloom again. But this time, she didn't feel like she was mending it. She felt like it was growing with her. When she returned to the cottage that evening, she placed the book beside the lantern on the windowsill. The two belonged together, memory and light. That night, she dreamed of walking through the orchard, every branch touched with pale blossoms, the sound of voice she could almost, but not quite hear. And in the dream, she wasn't alone. By late March, the orchard had turned almost unrecognizable from the one Lena had first returned to. The trees shimmered with early buds, and the air was sweet enough to taste. The creek ran louder, quicker, churning over pebbles like laughter. Even the old fence posts seemed straighter somehow, as though the whole land had decided to stand up again after a long, hard sleep. The town nearby celebrated the thaw every year with what they called the Lantern Festival, a simple gathering by the river where people lit candles inside paper shells and set them adrift. When she was young, Lena used to go with Moreau, their hands sticky from toffee apples, their eyes following the soft light bobbing downstream. She hadn't gone in years, but this spring felt different, alive in a way that pulled her outward. So she cleaned up, braided her hair the way her aunt used to before market days, and made her way into town. The square was busy, but not loud. A kind of murmur, a chorus of small talk and laughter. The scent of baked bread and warm cider floated through the air. Children darted past carrying unlit lanterns, the paper painted with suns, birds, initials, or nothing at all. She bought one herself, plain, unpainted. The vendor smiled, pressing a stick of cinnamon into her palm as a charm for steady flame. The sky was just starting to dim when she reached the riverbank. Rows of people stood along the water, each holding a lantern. The reflection on the surface was already golden, the first few lights drifting like fireflies. Lena knelt and set her lantern gently on the water. It rocked once, twice, then steadied, catching the faintest wind. She whispered something, not a wish exactly, more thank you. When she looked up, she saw someone beside her doing the same. A man, tall, coat flecked with river mist, hands rough from work. He caught her glance and nodded. First one of the season, he said softly. His voice had that local lilt, the kind that softened the edges of words. She smiled. Mine too. They watched the lanterns float together in silence, the water glowing with drifting stars. After a while, he spoke again. You're from the orchard, aren't you? Miro's niece. She blinked, surprised he knew. I used to trade with him. Apples, mostly. He had a way of making you think he'd grown each one just for you. She laughed quietly. That sounds like him. I'm Elias, he said, offering his hand. Still work the markets sometimes, though mostly I fix boats now. She shook it, the warmth of his palm grounding her. When the last of the lanterns disappeared around the bend, he turned to her. You heading back up the ridge tonight? I am. He hesitated. It's dark, roads are muddy. Let me walk you part of the way. She almost refused out of habit, then saw the sincerity in his eyes and nodded. They walked beneath the silver light of the half-moon. The path curved through meadows glowing with dew, the grass whispering around their boots. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the market, the orchard's age. But soon it deepened. To me, Rose's kindness, his odd habits, how he used to talk to his trees as if they were old friends. I miss the kind of quiet, Elias said. It's different in town. Too many things pretending to matter. Lena smiled. You sound like him. He chuckled. Maybe I just miss his cider. When they reached the orchard gate, he paused. I'd forgotten how beautiful this place looked from here," he murmured. She followed his gaze. From the ridge, the orchard glowed faintly in the moonlight, a living tapestry of silver and shadow. "Come by sometime," she said before she could think. "We've enough work for 2 pairs of hands." He grinned. "I just might." When she entered the cottage that night, the air still smelled of river and smoke and cinnamon. She set the lantern stick in the hearth and watched the last ember flicker out, feeling for the first time in years that maybe the orchard wasn't so lonely after all. The next weeks unfolded in color. The orchard became a sea of white and pink, blossoms bursting open like breath after a long silence. Bees hummed between branches. The cat stalked invisible prey beneath drifting petals. Lena worked dawn to dusk, pruning, mending, tending to soil. The kind of work that left her body tired and her mind quiet. Elias began to visit, just as he'd promised. Sometimes with tools, sometimes with nothing but stories. He helped mend fences, fixed a leaky trough, and once spent an entire afternoon carving a new handle for the old wheelbarrow. He had a way of working in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, a presence that fit the rhythm of the orchard. One afternoon, while they rested under the central tree, he pulled something from his satchel, a wooden flute. "Used to play when I was younger," he said. "Helps keep the crows from thinking they own the place." He played softly, a tune that seemed half lullaby, half laughter. The notes floated through the orchard, weaving with birdsong. Lena listened, eyes closed. For a moment she imagined Moreau there, leaning against the trunk, tapping his foot to the melody. When he finished, she said, "He'd have liked that." "I played it once for him," Elias said. "Years ago." He said it made the apples taste sweeter. They both laughed. After he left that evening, she found herself lighting the lantern again, setting it on the windowsill where it caught the last of the sun. She opened Moreau's letters, rereading one she hadn't before, a shorter note, written in hurried ink. "There's music in everything here if you listen long enough, even in the quiet, especially in the quiet." She smiled. The next morning, she took a notebook outside and began to sketch the orchard. Not perfectly, but earnestly. She labeled trees, traced shadows, noted where bees gathered most. It wasn't about accuracy. It was about memory. By the end of the week, Elias brought her a small surprise, a sapling wrapped in burlap. "Found it near the marsh," he said. "Don't know what it'll be. Figured it might like your company." They planted it together near the edge of the orchard, where the soil was softest. When they finished, she said, "You think it'll grow?" He smiled. Things usually do when someone's watching. The wind stirred the branches above them, scattering petals like snow. Something in her chest loosened. Not grief, not quite joy. Something gentler, older, like the sound of the orchard breathing. By midsummer, the orchard was alive with sound. The hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, the low murmur of fruit heavy on the branch. Lena woke early to the light pooling through the curtains. The air smelled of honey and grass. The days stretched long, the kind that seemed to hold both promise and ache. She and Elias worked side by side now, harvesting the early fruit, repairing the press for cider. He built a small wooden table under the oldest tree where they'd take their breaks. A crooked table, uneven but sturdy. Sometimes they said little. Sometimes they talked until the shadows grew long. He told her about his father, who'd left when he was small, about how he'd learned the craft of fixing boats because someone once told him things worth saving are things that carry. She told him about leaving the orchard after Moreau died, how it felt like losing a language she no longer knew how to speak. He didn't try to fix her words, just listened. One afternoon, thunder rolled in from the west. They hurried to cover the baskets of fruit, the air thick and electric. Then came the rain, sudden, cleansing, drumming through the orchard like a heartbeat. They took shelter beneath the central tree, laughing as the downpour soaked through their clothes. When it finally eased, the world glowed, branches dripping gold, the air tasting alive. Lena tilted her face to the light breaking through the clouds. Elias watched her, and in the quiet that followed, something unspoken passed between them. A recognition, not of love exactly, but of belonging. Later that evening, when the last of the rain had dried, they sat by the table beneath the tree, sharing cider. "I think you'd be proud," Elias said. She nodded. "Maybe. Or he'd tell us we're doing it all wrong." He grinned. Either way, he'd stay for a drink. They clinked their cups and drank in silence as the orchard shimmered around them, endless and alive. When the first stars appeared, Lena lit the lantern and hung it from the branch above them. It glowed softly, swaying with the breeze. For the first time, she realized it didn't feel like a symbol of what was lost. It felt like a promise of what remained. By late August, the orchard had settled into a rhythm so deep it felt like breathing. Every morning, a thin mist curled between the rows of trees, and by noon, the sun turned everything gold. The apples had ripened, heavy and fragrant, and the pears along the southern edge hung like green bells. Lena and Elias worked from dawn until the shadows stretched across the grass. He would whistle softly as he filled baskets, and she would hum along sometimes without realizing it. Their movements had become an unspoken duet, passing crates, sorting fruit, checking for bruises. One evening, when the day had finally cooled, they climbed the small rise beyond the creek to watch the sky deepen into violet. The harvest moon rose, full, immense, luminous, casting silver over the orchard. "It almost looks too perfect," Elias said, his voice low, "like it's been waiting for us." Lena smiled, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Maybe it has. Everything feels lighter this year." He nodded. "The trees, too. You can hear it in the wind. Less strain, more sigh." She laughed. "You sound like Moreau now. Maybe you rubbed off on me through you." They sat for a long while in companionable quiet, the crickets tuning the edges of the night. When they finally returned to the cottage, Lena lit the lantern and placed it by the window. The reflection of the orchard glimmered faintly on the glass. Before heading to bed, she paused by the small sapling they'd planted months ago, now a thin young tree, its leaves catching moonlight. She pressed her fingers to the bark. "Good work today," she whispered, almost embarrassed. From the shadows, Elias' voice came softly. "You always talk to trees?" She turned, smiling. "Only the ones that listen." He chuckled. "Then this place must be full of good listeners." Something about his tone lingered as she went inside. Not heavy, but kind, like a quiet chord she hadn't realized was missing until it was played. The next weeks were full of motion, the kind that left no time for thought. They built racks for drying fruit, repaired the old cider press, and cleared the shed of mice and cobwebs. The press itself was a beast of oak and iron, older than either of them. It groaned like a creature waking from hibernation when they first tried it. "Needs oil," Elias muttered, kneeling to check the gears. "And maybe some faith." She grinned. "I've got oil. Faith you'll have to find somewhere else." He laughed, the sound bright in the still air. By the second week of September, the barrels began to fill, each sealed with linen and care. The scent of apples and spice clung to everything, sweet and heavy. In the evenings, they'd sit by the small wooden table under the tree, their hands stained, their clothes smelling faintly of cider. One night, Elias brought his flute again. He played a slower tune this time, something with the weight of memory. It rose and fell with the sound of distant owls. When he finished, Lena said softly, "You ever think about leaving this place?" He looked at her, surprised. "Leaving? Going somewhere else? Doing something new? I thought I would after Moreau died. But the more I stay, the harder it is to imagine." He leaned back, watching the stars between branches. "I used to want to leave," he said after a pause. Go south, maybe to the coast. Start over somewhere quiet. But, but now it feels like the quiet's already here. She felt the warmth of his words settle between them, heavier than the cider, steadier than the lantern light. When she went inside that night, she stood by the window long after he'd gone, watching the lantern flicker in the orchard. For the first time, she wondered if Moreau had known, not just about the orchard cycles, but about this way of the world finding balance again when two people cared enough to tend it. The next morning, she found a note on the porch in Elias's handwriting. Went to town for more nails. Back by dusk. Don't forget to eat. She smiled, shaking her head. It was absurd how much comfort a simple line could hold. That evening, when he returned, he brought something else. A small brass hinge and a polished wooden plaque. For the press, he said, a little shyly. Thought it deserved a name. He held it out to her. Carved into the wood, in rough but deliberate letters, were the words. She blinked, touched. That's perfect. They mounted it together on the press's side. And when the next barrel filled, it felt almost like a christening. By late October, the orchard had turned to fire. Leaves burned orange and gold, drifting down like sparks. The mornings came with frost along the windows, and the cat preferred the hearth to the yard. The cider barrels stood in neat rows, their lids sealed tight. The scent of fermentation, sweet, earthy, hung in the air. Elias had started building a small shelter near the edge of the orchard, saying it was for tools, though Lena suspected it was partly an excuse to stay longer. Won't be much use once the snow comes, she teased. Then I'll make it solid enough to wait for spring, he said, hammering a nail. She handed him another board. You really don't like leaving things half done, do you? He glanced at her, smiling faintly. Not the things that matter. The days shortened, but there was a calmness in the work now, the kind that came after a season well spent. They gathered the last of the apples, stored them in the cool cellar, and packed herbs to dry near the chimney. On the evening of the first frost, the air went perfectly still. The moon hung low, pale as milk. Lena wrapped herself in a thick shawl and stepped outside. The orchard glittered faintly, every branch and blade of grass jeweled with ice. She heard footsteps behind her. Elias joined her wordlessly, hands in his pockets, breath clouding in the air. It's beautiful, she whispered. He nodded, quiet too, like the world's holding its breath. They walked to the sapling they planted in spring. Its small trunk gleamed with frost, the leaves curled but clinging. She's made it, Elias murmured. Lena smiled. I didn't know we'd named her. He shrugged. Seems fitting. Tough little thing. She touched one frozen leaf gently. It'll be a hard winter. Then we'll wait it out together, he said simply. The way he said we warmed her more than the shawl. They stood there for a long while, watching the frost catch the lantern's glow, until the horizon began to pale with dawn. Back inside, Lena sat by the fire, pen in hand, writing a letter in Moreau's old notebook. Not to send, just to remember. The orchard breathes again, she wrote. There's someone here who listens the way you did. The trees remember, and so do I. Maybe that's what seasons are for, to teach us how to begin again. She closed the book and listened to the wind move through the trees, a sound both familiar and new, a promise of another spring waiting quietly just beyond the frost. By mid-November, the world seemed to hold its breath. The orchard lay still under a soft quilt of frost, and each morning the grass crunched faintly beneath their boots. The days were short now, the sun rising pale and low, setting almost before supper. Lena had never minded winter before, but this year it felt different, gentler, somehow. Perhaps it was the rhythm they had built, or the quiet companionship that now filled every hour. She and Elias had fallen into a new pattern of work. Each morning, they checked the barrels, ensuring the cider settled properly. Then they'd chop wood, mend tools, and patch the roof before snow came. In the afternoons, when light slanted golden through the bare branches, they'd take tea by the window and talk of small things. The cat's growing laziness, the way the smoke curled from the chimney, the faint prints of foxes along the fence. It was during one such afternoon that the first true snow arrived. It began as a whisper against the window, a few tentative flakes swirling down, then thickened into a steady, patient drift. Elias leaned forward, watching. "First snow always feels like an apology," he said. "An apology?" Lena smiled. He nodded. "For the cold coming. For taking the color away. It's winter's way of saying sorry." She laughed softly. "You've got a strange way of forgiving seasons. Maybe I've learned from you." They watched in silence for a time. The orchard beyond the glass blurred into a watercolor. White branches, gray sky, the faint amber glow of lanterns they'd hung earlier. After supper, Elias stoked the fire higher while Lena mended a scarf. The cottage was full of the smell of wood smoke and apple peel, and the cat had wedged itself comfortably by her feet. When the wind began to moan around the eaves, Elias said, "We should check the shed tomorrow. Make sure the cider doesn't freeze." She looked up from her sewing. "If the path's clear enough." "But yes." He nodded, eyes still on the flames. "You know," he said after a pause, "I used to hate winters. They made me restless, like I was wasting time just waiting for life to start again. And now, he smiled faintly. Now it feels like the waiting is part of it." Lena tied off her thread. "Moreau used to say that too. That rest is the root's way of working, just not where you can see it." Elias leaned back, thoughtful. "Then maybe we're doing all right." Outside, the snow deepened. The next morning, the world had gone white. Lena opened the door and laughed aloud. The orchard was transformed. The trees bowed under soft crowns of snow. The fence posts looked like candles. A single robin hopped along the windowsill, bright as a berry against the pale. Elias joined her with 2 mugs of steaming tea. They stood on the threshold, cups warming their hands, watching their breath curl into the crisp air. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's quiet," he replied, his voice hushed, reverent. Together, they made their way through the orchard, their boots leaving twin trails. The air smelled sharp and clean, each sound muffled by snow. When they reached the small shed at the edge of the field, Elias brushed frost from the door and gave it a firm tug. Inside, everything was in order, barrels steady, tools neatly stacked. The plaque on the cider press, the orchard's heart, gleamed faintly in the cold light. Lena smiled at it. Still beating, Elias laughed. "Barely, but yes." They lingered there a moment, letting the stillness settle around them. Outside, a jay called, distant and soft. When they returned to the cottage, Lena went straight to the window. From there, she could see the young sapling by the fence. Thin, fragile, its small branches dusted with snow. Elias followed her gaze. "She'll make it," he said quietly. "I think she will." He hesitated, then added, "You know, come spring, we could plant more. Not just apples, maybe plums or cherries. Fill the whole, far field." She turned toward him. He met her eyes and smiled. "If you'll have me." Something in her chest tightened. Not uncomfortably, just a warmth spreading slow and sure. "I think the orchard would like that," she said softly. Winter deepened. Days blurred gently into each other, a rhythm of tending the fire, reading old books, brewing tea, and stepping out now and then to feed the birds or clear the path. They spoke less as the weeks passed, but the silence was never empty. It was full of the small sounds of life. The creak of the chair, the crackle of logs, the distant sigh of wind through bare trees. One evening, near the solstice, Lena brought out Miro's old journal again. She had kept it close all year, its pages now swollen from handling. She read aloud by firelight, short passages about weather, harvests, and kindnesses long past. Elias listened, eyes half closed. When she finished, he said, "He wrote like he knew he was part of the orchard." She nodded. "He used to say the same about everyone who loved it, that we become a kind of root." He smiled at that. "Then you've got the deepest roots of anyone I've met." Lena looked toward the window where snow pressed faintly against the glass. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the ache of loss. Only a steady presence, like the hum of the earth below. The thaw came slow that year. In late February, icicles dripped steadily from the eaves, and the snow receded in ripples, revealing patches of brown grass and the first hints of green. Elias was mending the gate when Lena came out with a tray of tea. The air smelled faintly of thawed soil and wood smoke. "Feels like it's waking up," she said. He looked around, the orchard shining in the pale light. "It does." A soft breeze moved through the branches, scattering a few old leaves. Somewhere far off, a stream gurgled, water finding its voice again. They stood side by side, steaming mugs in hand, watching the world exhale. "You think it'll be a good spring?" she asked. "I think it already is," he said. And in that simple moment, the two of them there, the orchard stretching before them, the faint sound of thawing earth, it seemed true. The orchard would bloom again. The roots would drink, the branches would stretch. The press would hum, the barrels would fill. Life, as it always did, would return. And when it did, they would be there, side by side, tending, listening, beginning again. The end. Thank you for listening. If this story spoke to you, leave a trace behind, a like, a comment, or a moment of stillness. Until next time, keep wandering.